A 15-year-old boy is sitting alone in a darkened bedroom in South Florida. Outside, the neighborhood is quiet. His parents think he's asleep. But he's been awake for 22 hours straight, and on the screen in front of him, the screen casting pale blue light across his face. He's not playing a game. He's inside the Pentagon. Not in the building. Not physically. But in every way that matters in the modern world, he is there. He is reading internal communications between defense analysts. He is watching classified data move across encrypted corridors. He has installed a program that quietly copies every email passing through a critical node of America's most sensitive network. And not a single alarm has gone off. Not one. His name is Jonathan James. His hacker alias is Comrade. And what he does between the ages of 15 and 16 will permanently reshape how the United States government thinks about digital security. It will end careers, trigger the highest cybersecurity alert in American history, and ultimately consume the boy who started it all. This is not a story about a villain. It's not quite a story about a hero either. It's something far harder to categorize. A story about a mind that was extraordinary, a system that was broken, and a life that fell apart in the space between the two. Jonathan James grows up in Pinecrest, a quiet suburb just south of Miami. Modest houses, trimmed lawns, the kind of neighborhood where nothing seems to happen. By every external measure, his childhood is unremarkable. His family isn't wealthy, but they're comfortable. His father, Robert, works as a programmer, and that detail changes everything. Because in the James household, computers aren't luxury items. They're tools. They're everywhere. And from the time Jonathan is old enough to climb onto a chair and reach a keyboard, he's drawn to them the way other children are drawn to sports or music or art. By the age of 6, he isn't just playing on the family computer. He's studying it, asking what each program does, wanting to understand the logic underneath the interface, the architecture hiding behind the icons and the menus. His father notices. Jonathan isn't just curious in the casual way. Children are curious. He's methodical about it, relentless. By 12, Jonathan is doing something that most professional IT administrators would hesitate to attempt. He wipes the family computer's Windows installation and replaces it with Linux. Not because anyone told him to, not because he found instructions somewhere, but because he wants to understand how an operating system actually works at its core. He wants to get beneath the surface. He always wants to get beneath the surface. His parents don't know whether to be proud or alarmed. Both, probably. His father installs parental controls to limit the hours Jonathan spends in front of screens. Jonathan disables them in a single afternoon, not to be defiant, but because the restriction doesn't make sense to him. He's learning. Why would you stop someone from learning? They unplug the computer. They tell him to go to sleep. He waits until the house is quiet and turns it back on. This is the fundamental tension at the heart of Jonathan's story. A mind that cannot be contained by the ordinary boundaries placed around it, colliding with a world that hasn't yet figured out what to do with a mind like that. By the time he reaches his mid-teens, Jonathan has moved far beyond what any school curriculum could offer him. He's spending his nights in technical forums, absorbing concepts that wouldn't appear in mainstream computer science textbooks for years. Buffer overflows, packet sniffing, port scanning, privilege escalation. He's not learning these things to cause harm. He's learning them because they represent puzzles, and Jonathan James cannot leave a puzzle unsolved. At some point, though, reading isn't enough. Theory reaches its limit. He needs to know if what he's learned actually works. He needs to test it against something real. He gives himself an alias, Comrade, and under that name, he begins to move through the internet's networks the way a locksmith might walk through a neighborhood, not to rob anyone, but to see which doors are actually locked. His early targets are instructive. He probes the networks of BellSouth, one of the largest telecommunications companies in the southeastern United States. Over the course of several nights, he finds an unpatched server, enters quietly, and explores customer databases, billing systems, internal correspondence, the infrastructure that tens of millions of people depend on every day. He doesn't take anything. He doesn't destroy anything. He catalogs what he finds and keeps moving. He does the same thing with the Miami-Dade School District, one of the largest in the country. Each intrusion is a training run, a proof of concept. If corporations and school systems are this exposed, what else is open? He's 15 years old, and he's about to find out. It's the summer of 1999 when Jonathan's scanner returns a result that makes him stop and look twice. a government domain, an IP address resolving to a NASA server, specifically the Marshall Space Flight Center, the facility in Huntsville, Alabama, that oversees some of the agency's most critical operations, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, the organization that put human beings on the moon, the institution that, in the American imagination, represents the absolute pinnacle of technological capability. Jonathan runs the scan again, and again, and again. The results don't change. Open ports, unprotected remote access channels, administrator passwords that he will later describe, almost with contempt, as embarrassingly weak. The security posture of one of America's most celebrated agencies is, by any reasonable standard, worse than what most small businesses were running at the time. He enters carefully. A buffer overflow vulnerability in the DNS service gives him initial access, and from there the network opens up like a building where someone has left every internal door propped ajar. Within hours, Jonathan has accessed 13 separate NASA computer systems, 13 machines running active operations inside the agency's internal network. He moves through the system with the patience of someone who knows exactly how dangerous it would be to rush. He explores file structures, traces connections between servers, reads documentation. And then he finds something that changes the gravity of what he's doing. The files describe the software controlling the environmental systems aboard the International Space Station. Life support, specifically. Oxygen generation, carbon dioxide scrubbing, water recycling, temperature and humidity regulation. These are the systems that keep human beings alive in the vacuum of space. And Jonathan James, a teenager in a Miami suburb, is now holding the source code. He downloads 3,471 files. The estimated value of the stolen software is $1,700,000. But what shakes Jonathan, what genuinely surprises him, isn't the value of what he's taken. It's the quality of it. Obsolete functions, hard-coded values that should never be hard-coded. Comments written in 3 different languages, suggesting the code has been passed between teams without any coherent ownership. He writes in an IRC channel that night, with the blunt confidence of someone who knows what good code looks like, and knows this, isn't it? Then he says something that becomes a turning point. If NASA is this poorly defended, he thinks, what about the Pentagon? The Department of Defense. The heart of America's military infrastructure. The nerve center of national security. Jonathan begins studying its network architecture with the same methodical focus he brings to everything, and he homes in on a specific target, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, known as the DTRA, a branch of the Department of Defense responsible for identifying and neutralizing threats from weapons of mass destruction, biological agents, and chemical warfare. A quiet, largely unknown organization whose work is considered vital to national security. Jonathan finds his way in through a Cisco router running an outdated firmware version with 14 documented vulnerabilities. He exploits one of them. The door opens. He's inside the Pentagon's network. He doesn't celebrate. He doesn't brag. Not yet. He moves carefully, the way he always moves, and he begins to understand the scale of what he's found. He locates a central network node, a junction through which a significant portion of the agency's internal traffic passes, and he installs a back door, like a sniffing program designed to intercept and copy everything that flows through it. Emails, internal memos, personnel communications, sensitive documents passing between analysts who have no idea that their conversations are being read. Over the following 10 weeks, from September through October of 1999, Jonathan intercepts more than 3,000 internal emails from the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. He collects at least 19 sets of official login credentials, usernames, and passwords belonging to active accounts within the Department of Defense's network. He has, in effect, built a private surveillance post inside the United States military. And he's done it without triggering a single automated alert. He saves his collection of intercepted files in a folder. He labels it Pentagon, Trophies. For Jonathan, this is still, on some level, a game. He sees open doors. He walks through them. The concept of consequence, real, life-altering consequence, doesn't register the way it would for most people his age. He is addicted to the feeling of access. The sensation of being somewhere you're not supposed to be, of knowing things you're not supposed to know. But every time he enters a system, he leaves traces. Not many, not obvious ones, but traces nonetheless. At NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center, a systems administrator named James McCarthy begins to notice something wrong. Unusual CPU activity on a server. Processes consuming resources that no active project should be consuming. He follows the trail through log files, through access records, through a chain of anomalies that individually might be dismissed, but together form a pattern that cannot be ignored. Someone has installed a rootkit. Someone has created backdoor accounts. Someone has extracted a significant volume of data from the agency's internal network. McCarthy makes a decision that will cost the agency significant time and money, but that he considers unavoidable. He takes 43 servers offline, all of them. Every machine that might have been compromised, isolated, and pulled from the network for forensic review. The operation takes 21 days, during which NASA's connectivity is severely disrupted. The financial cost is substantial. But the deeper cost is something else entirely. The realization, within one of America's most prestigious institutions, that they had been exposed. That someone had walked through their systems for weeks, reading their files and stealing their code, and nobody had noticed. At the Department of Defense, a parallel recognition is taking shape. Network analysts are finding the same kinds of anomalies, connections that appear and disappear at irregular hours, traffic patterns that don't match any known user's behavior, a persistent background presence that has been quietly harvesting data for weeks. The pattern is identical in both organizations, and when that realization lands, everything changes. The designation that is activated is called Flashpoint Alpha. It is the highest level of cybersecurity emergency in the American federal system, a designation that triggers immediate coordinated response across multiple agencies. Within hours, investigators from the Air Force's Office of Special Investigations, the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Cyber Division are working together from a shared command center. The objective is clear. Find who did this before they can do anything else. The investigation is meticulous and methodical. Log files from dozens of servers are cross-referenced. Connection timestamps are mapped. The tools used in each intrusion are reverse-engineered. Telecommunications records are subpoenaed. Every IP address associated with the intrusions is traced through as many relays as possible. And Jonathan made a mistake. Several times, in the early stages of testing an exploit, he connected directly, without routing his traffic through anonymizing relays, from his home internet connection. He was confident that a connection lasting only a few seconds wouldn't be long enough to log. He was wrong. On November 14th of 1999, investigators trace a 3-second direct connection back to a residential address in Pinecrest, Florida. The account is registered to a man named Robert James. The ghost has an address. Cross-referencing the address with school enrollment records takes very little time. There is a minor in that household, a student enrolled at South Miami Senior High School, Jonathan James, 16 years old. The FBI places him under physical surveillance for several weeks before moving in. Agents watch him ride his bicycle to school in the mornings, eat lunch alone, walk home in the afternoons. He doesn't seem dangerous. He doesn't seem like someone who has spent the better part of a year penetrating the most sensitive networks in American government. A teacher, when asked about him, tells the investigators something that sharpens the picture considerably. That Jonathan once repaired the school's entire network during a lunch break, solving in 20 minutes a problem that the district's contracted IT firm had been unable to resolve in 2 days. At 4 in the morning on January 26th of the year 2000, the street outside the James family home fills with vehicles. Federal agents move to the front door. They're upstairs and in Jonathan's room within seconds of entering the house. He doesn't have time to power anything down. He doesn't have time to destroy evidence or disconnect drives. He is arrested before he fully understands what's happening. His parents come downstairs to find their son in handcuffs, surrounded by federal agents who are methodically removing every piece of electronic equipment in the room. Computers, cables, external drives, disks. Every artifact of the world Jonathan has been living in for the past several years, packed into evidence bags and carried out the door. During his interrogation, Jonathan cooperates. He explains his methods with the calm precision of someone who has nothing to hide about the technical side of what he did, only about the fact that he did it at all. He identifies vulnerabilities the investigators didn't know to look for. He describes access points that hadn't yet been found. He tells them everything, clearly and without affect, and then he promises he will never do it again. He is charged with 2 counts of unauthorized computer access. Because he is a juvenile, federal prosecutors cannot try him as an adult, though they make clear, publicly, with significant fanfare, that the case represents exactly the kind of threat that the justice system must confront without hesitation. The Attorney General of the United States issues a statement. Unauthorized access to computer systems is a serious crime, she says, regardless of the age of the perpetrator or the method of entry. In May of the year 2000, Jonathan James is sentenced in juvenile court. 6 months of house arrest, mandatory letters of apology to NASA and the Department of Defense, probation until his 18th birthday, during which every significant decision he makes will be monitored, and a complete prohibition on the use of computers for the duration of his supervision. He becomes the youngest person ever convicted of a federal cybercrime in American history. He is 16 years old. The years that follow are difficult in ways that don't make headlines. House arrest is its own kind of psychological cage, especially for someone who has always defined himself through a screen, through the act of learning and exploring and pushing through barriers. Without access to the internet, without the stimulation that has structured every significant experience of his adolescent life, Jonathan struggles. He completes his house arrest. He begins probation. He tries, by all available accounts, to rebuild something. He attends school. He looks for work in technology. He stays away from anything that might be considered a violation of his conditions. Then a routine probation check reveals a positive drug test. Not a serious violation in most ordinary circumstances. But Jonathan is not living under ordinary circumstances. The conditions of his probation are absolute, and the violation sends him to a juvenile correctional facility in Alabama for 6 months. He is 18 years old when he walks back out. And something in him, something that had been resilient through all of it, has changed. He moves back into the house in Pinecrest where he grew up. His mother has died of cancer. His father is still there. Jonathan has no degree, no stable employment, no clear path forward. His name, whenever it surfaces, is attached to a story about a teenager who hacked the Pentagon, which sounds impressive in certain circles and alarming in others, but doesn't translate easily into a career. He is 24 years old in the spring of 2008 when the world he thought he'd left behind crashes back into his life. In January of 2007, the details of the largest financial data breach in American history had begun to emerge. An anonymous group of hackers had penetrated the networks of multiple major retail corporations and extracted the financial records of approximately 180 million payment cards. Credit and debit card numbers, names, addresses, purchase histories, personal identification numbers. The financial damage to banks and card issuers approaches $400 million. The investigation leads to Albert Gonzalez, a Miami-born hacker who had previously worked as a government informant before returning to cybercrime. Gonzalez and his associates used a technique called war driving through commercial areas with a high-gain antenna, identifying vulnerable corporate wireless networks, and slipping inside to install data harvesting software. Gonzalez proves to be a meticulous, well-organized criminal with sophisticated technical skills and a network of trusted collaborators. When federal investigators trace the full scope of Gonzalez's operation, they encounter a name in their cross-referencing that they recognize immediately: the alias JJ, a participant in some of the technical discussions surrounding the breach. Someone whose identity, investigators believe, may overlap with a known figure, Jonathan James. There is no concrete evidence, no server logs connecting his machines to the breach, no financial records suggesting he profited from it. But his name carries weight in ways that evidence sometimes doesn't. And in May of 2008, the Secret Service executes simultaneous search warrants at Jonathan's home, his brother's home, and his girlfriend's apartment. Agents take everything. Again, computers, hard drives, USB drives, phones. The same ritual, 7 years later, as if no time has passed at all. They also find 2 other things in Jonathan's bedroom: a legally registered firearm and an old letter. A letter written in a moment of deep personal crisis sometime in his recent past. A letter that makes clear how low he had sunk at some point and how close to the edge he had come. For the investigators, these are pieces of a profile. For Jonathan, they are the artifacts of a life that has never been entirely his own. A life lived in the shadow of what he did at 15. A life in which the name Comrade will always surface when it's least wanted and most damaging. The technical review of his seized equipment takes weeks. The investigators are thorough. They're looking for anything: fragments of code, encrypted archives, communications with Gonzalez's network. That might place Jonathan James inside the breach. They find nothing. But Jonathan doesn't know that yet. And in the silence of that uncertainty, in the space between the search and whatever comes next, something in his thinking hardens into a certainty he cannot reason his way out of. He has read, in the years since his conviction, accounts written by other hackers who passed through the federal justice system. He understands, in granular detail, how prosecutions are built. Not always around the most guilty party, but around the most legible narrative, the most recognizable name. The story that plays best in a courtroom and in the press. And in any story about this breach, in any courtroom anywhere in America, Jonathan James is the most legible name in the room. The teenager who hacked the Pentagon. The boy who stole life support software from NASA. Whatever the actual evidence shows, his past is the story. And he is convinced that his past will be the verdict. On May 18th of 2008, police respond to a call from the James family home in Pinecrest. Jonathan James is found dead at 24 years old. He has taken his own life. He leaves a note. The note is calm and precise, written in the same clear, unflinching voice he apparently applied to everything. He writes that he has no faith in the justice system. He writes that he has spent his entire life under a shadow, defined by a past he cannot escape, accused of things he did not do, and certain that the weight of his history will determine the outcome regardless of the facts. He writes that he is not part of Gonzalez's network, that he had no role in the breach, that he is being used as a convenient answer to a complicated question. He writes that he would rather die free than live as a prisoner for something he didn't do. When the Gonzalez case is finally resolved, Jonathan James's name does not appear in the charges. The convictions come down in 2010. Albert Gonzalez receives 20 years. His associate Christopher Scott receives 7. The figure known in hacker circles as JJ is identified as a different person entirely, someone using a variation of the alias unconnected to Jonathan. Jonathan James was never charged, never indicted, never formally named as a suspect. In all probability, he would never have been prosecuted. He died for a verdict that was never going to come. What Jonathan James represents in the history of cybersecurity is significant and unambiguous. The vulnerabilities he exposed in NASA's life support systems and in the Defense Threat Reduction Agency's network were real, dangerous, and corrected directly as a result of his intrusions. His case accelerated federal investment in digital security infrastructure by years. It forced institutions to confront the gap between how secure they believed their systems were and how secure those systems actually were. A gap that a single teenager with a dial-up connection had been able to walk through undetected for months. But the legacy of Jonathan James is also a story about something more painful than a security failure or a legal case. It's a story about what happens when a mind of genuine, exceptional ability develops in an environment that has no framework for it, no guidance, no structured outlet, no way to absorb the energy of someone who is simply too fast, too curious, and too restless for the world as it exists. He was a boy who wanted to understand how things worked, who couldn't stop pushing at locked doors, not out of malice, but out of an almost compulsive need to know what was on the other side. Who believed, with the invincibility of adolescence, that understanding something and owning it were not the same thing. He was right about that, but he was also wrong about enough other things, including, at the very end, the one thing that mattered most, that the story ends not with a revelation or a conviction, but with a silence, a bedroom in Pinecrest, a screen gone dark, and a question that has no satisfying answer. What could Jonathan James have become if the world had known what to do with him? If this story reached something in you, if you found yourself sitting with it, turning it over, unable to quite let it go, then you already understand why we make these films. Stories like Jonathan's exist in the margins of official history. They don't fit cleanly into categories of good or bad, guilty or innocent. They demand more from the people who encounter them. We tell these stories because they deserve to be told fully, and because the questions they leave behind are more important than the answers we wish we had. If you want more stories like this one, cases that refuse to resolve cleanly, lives that illuminate something true and uncomfortable about the world we live in, subscribe to Behind the Enigma. We'll be here in the space between the official record and the truth. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.